In this video, we're gonna check if you have a too extreme arch in your back, where that comes from and which exercises you can do to work against that. Hey guys, so if you have back pain and you tend to have a too severe arch in your low back whenever you're standing up, which can also be this sway back posture that a lot of people have, because you also have a great arch in that position, or when you're sitting down and you're sitting too upright, and that is also causing too much tension in your low back, or when you're bending forward and you keep your pelvis locked in this anterior tilted position, and then when you come up, you extend up and use mainly the back muscles instead of pushing the hips forward, chances are that your hip flexor muscles are pretty tight. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It can also just be a motor control problem that you're just not used to moving your pelvis enough in your everyday movements. But if it's the hip flexor muscles, we're gonna test that now and then do specific exercises to loosen them up. And we will then also do a test to see if it maybe just is a motor control problem, or just a habit that you're so used to, but you don't really have tight hip flexors. So let's start by doing the hip flexor test. And for that, you just get into a half kneeling position where you try to be upright in your upper body. You have a 90-degree angle in your knee and in your hips. And in this position, you now try to posteriorly tilt the pelvis, meaning tucking it under, and see if you are actually able to do that in this position. If not, if it's just like a very tiny, maybe jerky movement here, and you're not really able to control that and to do this posterior tilt, tipping the pelvis back, then chances are high that your hip flexor is tight. If you're able to do this, to go all the way from anterior tilt to a posterior tilt, then try to check and see how strong is the stretch that you have in your front thigh muscles here. If it's above a 5 on a 1 to 10, you probably also have tight hip flexors. If you're able to posterior tilt the pelvis and you don't really feel a stretch in your front thigh in this position, then you most likely don't have too tight hip flexors. So that is the test. Do the test on both sides. And then what you can do in order to loosen up the tightness in that hip flexor is you can grab a foam roll and you can place your leg on it, and now make sure that you are not extending too much. So try to pull the belly button in, and then in this position you try to roll slowly back and forth and try to find a spot that feels uncomfortable, that can actually even hurt a little bit, and then you just stay on that spot and you bend your knee, bring your heel to your butt. That might intensify the pain, but that's okay. Try to bear it and go for 10 to 15 slow repetitions of bending your knee and extending it, and see if the pain dissipates while you're doing that. You then move on to the next spot and do the same thing on the other spot. Try to find 2 to 3 spots, loosen up that hip flexor, and then get back into the half kneeling position and try to do the test again. Are you now able to get more into a posterior tilted position? Do you not really feel that much stretch and tightness in your front thigh anymore? Then this little exercise definitely helped you, and we can move on to the next exercise. If it's still the same, or if you didn't have any problems to begin with, so you didn't have the hip flexor tightness, then let's see and test if you actually have an arched back or not. And for that, you grab your stick and you hold it behind your back. And what you now want to do is you try to just stand upright, just stand as you normally stand. Don't try to really extend and straighten up your spine too much, but just stay in that position and be really honest to yourself and feel and see how many fingers can you fit between your low back and the stick here. So the stick should have contact to your pelvis, to your mid back, and to your head. And then in this position, see, okay, how many fingers fit between here. If it's more than 2 fingers, so if you really more in this position and it is more than 2 fingers, then you probably have an arched back. If it's less than 2 fingers, or maybe even less than 1 finger, then you don't have an arched back. And if it's less than 1 finger, you probably have more of a flat back. So if you didn't have problems doing the hip flexor test, so you didn't feel any tightness there and you were able to move your pelvis, but you see that in this test you actually do have an arched back, then it's probably not because of your hip flexors, but more so that you are either not used to moving your pelvis alongside your body whenever you're moving, or it's just a habit. It's just a slack that you're lacking stiffness in certain muscles on the front side of your body and in your glutes, so that you just tend to get into this position, which is the easiest way for you to hold yourself up, and so your body got used to it. You then want to do the following exercises. So either way, if you had the arch in your back or if you had the hip flexor tightness, we're going to do the following exercise. If you didn't have any of these problems, then they're probably not for you. But let's get in this bridge position where you have a bend of your knee, which is almost 90 degrees. So from here you have your hands by your side, and you now want to slowly posterior tilt your pelvis and roll it up using your glute muscles, and then come all the way up to where you have a line from the knee, your pelvis, all the way down to your shoulders, and make sure your rib cage stays low. So you don't push up your rib cage, but keep it down. And then in this position, you just stay here and breathe deeply through your nose, expanding your rib cage in all directions, and then breathe out. Try to tighten up your abs in this position, and hold for 30 to 45 seconds. And if you want a progression here, you can lift one leg up. You can even bend it and pull it towards you. This makes it even harder. And then really try to push into the floor, push your hips up as high as possible. And then you can, if you want, go down and up and do some 15 to 20 repetitions of this exercise on each side. Next one will then be the integration into the hip hinge. So go grab your stick again, and really now we want to focus on keeping your back more straight and your pelvis more in a posterior tilted position. So press the stick into the floor in front of you, arms are stretched out, your feet are hip width apart, your knees are just slightly bent, so just unlock them, and you now push your hips back and lower your upper body down while you, in this position, try to posterior tilt your pelvis. So tip it back, get a little rounding of your low back here, and then come into the opposite and the more of an extension in your low back, and then try to find a middle. So really try to posterior tilt it a little bit, not too much that you really round your back, but also try to get out of this extreme arch here and try to find the middle where you feel like this part is really straight. You can look in the mirror and make sure that that's the case. And then in this position, you breathe deeply into your belly and rib cage. Try to expand it in all directions. And push the stick away from you while you pull your hips back. And only lower your body down to the point where you feel that you can maintain that straight spine and don't have too much tension in your low back, but you keep that little bit of a posterior tilt in your back. Hold that position for 10 to 15 breaths. And if you want a progression here, have the stick behind your back, and then again try to bend forward, but only to the point where you feel like you can keep the back straight here. Make sure you get out of the anterior tilt, more in a posterior tilted position, and then breathe deeply through your nose, in and out. And the next progression would then be having a stick in front of you. Try to have your palms facing up. Keep it up, and here really make sure that you don't extend too much, pushing the rib cage forward, but really try to stay in a line. If not, be more upright here and hold this position instead of going all the way down and then extending too much. So stay more upright. Focus on pushing, pulling the hips back, pushing the stick forward, and breathe deeply. And hold for as long as it feels comfortable for you. And the more often you do these exercises, you will see that you work against that extreme arch in your back. You get more tight and more strength and activation of your deep core muscles and the glutes and the hamstrings, and that all will help you to get out of that extreme arch in your low back and therefore help you with your back pain as well.